If my partner is the villain in this story, then I don't have to take accountability. Then I don't have to look at my side of the shit.
What if everything you thought was love was actually control?
With narcissistic people, they do take a lot of time to stockpile information about you in the beginning to then know exactly how to push your buttons and pull your strings.
She tracks your phone. She demands constant reassurance. Every argument somehow becomes your fault. Sound familiar?
If we can't communicate in relationships and one person's taking too much accountability and the other person's taking none, that's throwing off the balance of the ecosystem.
Men in toxic relationships are ignored, dismissed, even laughed at. But today, we break the silence.
The healthier way to handle that is to say, I'm aware that this is a trigger for me, and can we have a conversation around this thing? There is a lot of evidence around narcissistic personality disorder and narcissism stemming from childhood trauma.
If you've ever felt trapped, manipulated, or emotionally drained, this is the episode you need to hear.
You're not coming into every relationship thereafter with the assumption that you're going to be deceived and hurt. Most people deep down want the stability, but they just have to unpack some of the shit that makes the chaos feel familiar to them. We have the expectation for an unhealthy dynamic, and we're going into dating with this expectation when you actually don't want that to happen. It's like breathing a whole nother relationship that you weren't even living in real life.
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Bre, welcome to the show.
Oh, so happy to be back.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on this rebrand. Last time you were on, it was on the, From the Ashes rebrand. And now in this one, we focus specifically on men's mental health. So I'm excited to have you on because I think we don't talk enough about men being in toxic relationships as the kind of victim side. I think the narrative, for better or for worse, is that often the male is the abuser, right? And the female in the relationship is the victim or the person being abused. So I'm excited to pick your brain and learn more about the other side of the coin.
Yes. Yeah, the media has definitely given attention for the word narcissist specifically, to be more qualifying of the man than of the woman. And I don't know the specific statistics. I think there is a slightly higher percentage of narcissists, men with NPD, the full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. But there are plenty of women who are narcissistic or narcissists, right? We look at it kind of on a spectrum. And it's important to talk about that experience for the men as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm so mixed about our industry because I think that there's a lot of good things about making this stuff accessible. But I think, narcissistic personality disorder, it gets thrown around all the time. Whereas this is a clinical diagnosis that you can't just make after listening to a couple TikToks, I think the same with borderline personality disorder, which I think is the opposite, right? That one many women get labeled with that. Although there are quite a few men that have that condition as well.
An overarching blanket on anything that's mental health. It's always check your sources, make sure you know where you're getting your information and that you're seeing that replicated in other places to know that it's valid, and not trust every TikTok video that you see that you're just kind of consuming as you're doom scrolling.
Right, absolutely. Especially if they're not coming from anyone that's licensed or trained or really knows anything, right? It's just AI generated or things like that. Let's just dive into the experience. How does narcissistic personality disorder look like in a woman as it differs from a man? What are some of the different qualities, or how might that manifest?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the research that I've done around narcissism, it hasn't really talked gender. When they define narcissism, and the definition that I resonate with the most is a person who is seeking control and validation from a relationship as opposed to love and connection. So they are getting into relationships based on wanting to feel that validation of being able to control you, being able to pull that love out of you, instead of the people who are listening who are not narcissistic, instead of that, the desire that we have to actually create a bond and to be vulnerable and be authentic and actually create a root system with somebody. The narcissistic people are more in it for like the surface level, what can I pull from this, as opposed to what can I put into this. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, let me ask you this, like, are they aware of it? Like, do people with narcissist personality disorder, narcissists, like, are they aware that there's another model? Or is that just kind of their default for love?
I think that's $1 million question. I get asked that a lot with my clients of like, do they know what they're doing? Do they know, is this all like contrived beforehand, or is this something that they are just reflexively doing because it's a coping mechanism or protection mechanism? And I think it depends on the person. So if we talk about like a malignant narcissist, that's somebody who really feel like gets off on hurting other people. They are intentionally creating experiences to cause pain, versus maybe a covert narcissist who is acting from a place of wounding and of survival. And in order for that person to survive, they think that they have to manipulate everybody and blame shift and keep the focus off of what they're doing wrong. And it also depends on where they are in the spectrum. So people with NPD, these tendencies express a lot more intensely than somebody who has narcissistic tendencies, who might be on the lower end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because yeah, in some of the literature out there, or the, you know, content, it paints them as these like masterminds, right? That they're just like plotting and scheming, and they're like actively trying. I know that is, I would imagine, a smaller percentage, right? I think that is out there, and that in some ways is like evil, right? Because it is just like trying to like hurt other people and boost themselves up. But I would agree with you. I think I'd imagine most of them, it is a defensive, reflexive, you know, action. I don't think it makes it right, and certainly it's difficult to be in a relationship with. But I do think there's like a lot of trauma and a lot of things where they, you know, they don't know what connection is even, right? It's all more like, hey, what have you done for me lately? Versus, hey, can we just enjoy being together?
Yeah, it's kind of like that extreme version of what is modeled to you and the trauma that you've experienced when you're a child. For some of us, that trauma expresses when we're older to be the rescuer, to be the hero in the relationship. And for other people, it expresses as being the taker and being the one who manipulates and the one who always has control of the situation, because that's safety. So it's like, where did we learn what safety is? Maybe they didn't learn what connection was because they never had that modeled to them. They never felt that. And there is a lot of evidence around narcissistic personality disorder and narcissism stemming from childhood trauma. So we know that it's a personality disorder that is affected by, I guess, trauma that we have gone through or created through that.
For sure, right? And like you said, the modeling, I think, is really critical. You know, we'll kind of use heterosexual language just for kind of ease of conversation. But I think if the person sees gender roles growing up and they see, you know, their mother versus father acting in a certain way, and they don't do the work that, you know, you and I are all about, right? That kind of self-development, self-introspection work, they don't know there's anything different. You know, they might think that all women are like their mother, right? Or all men are like their father. They haven't opened their eyes to even seeing that a relationship could be different, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested to hear your opinion on this too, because the lack of empathy, I've heard be argued in both ways. So lack of empathy is one of the main characteristics of somebody who's narcissistic. And some people argue that that's a skill that you have to be taught. And some people argue that that's a skill that that's inherent, unless something is like not firing in your brain correctly. What do you think about that? Because I don't know if I come to a conclusion around empathy.
I think like that's a good point. Let me think about that. I want to give the half answer of it depends, but I guess I'll think out loud as we're talking, right? Like what I see with kids, right? I think they are inherently narcissistic, right? They're very selfish. They don't really understand their impact on the world, right? I don't know if that's because of narcissism or because of like their brains isn't developed to a level where they can like have, I think what the research calls theory of mind, like they'd be able to like put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? They can't do a perspective shift like that, but they'll often be very selfish, right? Because their needs, I think, are so loud in their internal system that they don't have room for any other people. So like they're going to just start screaming or crying or hitting or freaking out because like what they're going through is the most important thing, full stop. And they can't like think about anybody else during that because they're just like being overwhelmed and flooded, you know? So I'd lean more that I think empathy has to be taught. But the reason I hesitated when you asked the question initially is when I look at kids, especially how they deal with like animals, right? Or how they deal with like cute things that look like babies, you know, whether it's like a toy or a stuffy or their pet, you know, a kitten or whatever, like they seem to have an unbelievable amount of empathy, you know, and like don't want to see violence towards things that look helpless or things that look cute or should be taken care of. So maybe there's like some kind of like caregiver thing or protection thing that is like proto-empathy. But I do see that also in young kids a lot, is that they are really drawn to protecting like cute little things, you know?
Yeah. And that's one of the markers of like sociopathic expression in adulthood, right? Is how children treat animals as a child and if they intentionally hurt animals. That's a really interesting point. And I'm just thinking from like little girls tend to carry around baby dolls, you know, and like take care of baby dolls. And maybe it's something to do with, you know, how trauma will freeze us in an age or freeze us in an experience. Perhaps the narcissism trauma, the trauma that creates or helps to foster that, like sort of like cements you in that period of time where it is only my needs are necessary and important. And how do I move everybody around this chessboard in order to get my needs met? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I'd love to, you know, either in this show or another episode is like talk about sociopaths, because I'm hearing like we're kind of getting into that, right? Which is like, I think really misunderstood and not really well researched in our field, right? But when you talk about moving people around the chessboard, right? My understanding of sociopathy is that it's like a ultra objectification, right? Like everybody is a object, you know, and no one is like a real person. The only real person is you, right? Is the person, the first person perspective, but everything else is just like an object in the world. And yeah, I'm curious. I wonder if that is the default state or is that a trauma-induced state?
Yeah. They do say, or I have read that the malignant narcissist is the closest to the sociopathic personality, in just like, if we're talking about this again, the spectrum, where they are the ones that lack the most empathy and see people the most as that objectifying nature. So again, not all people with narcissistic tendencies are going to be moving around this chessboard and playing a larger picture cognitively. Maybe again, that's coming from the place of like, I need my partner to think this thing, because if she thinks something else, then she's going to start questioning me about it. And then the focus is going to be on me, and I can't take that, right? There can be little narcissistic things, I think, that people do out of that trauma, out of that like reaction protection place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's just like, it's like how much scheming is involved, you know? And I think in my clients, right? Like there are some clients that when they talk about relationship conversations, it's like highly tactical. You know, it's like, I'm going to say this in this way so that she feels this, and then I do that. Like, and that's narcissistic tendencies. I think that's also like a lot of anxiety manifests that way, trying to play out the flow chart. But it's like really cognitive as far as how to like just deal with people. And then I have other clients that are completely winging it, right? They're like, oh no, like I'm just going in, I'm just saying what I want to say, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but they don't seem to have that kind of like tactics layer on top of their interactions with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting experience, because also with narcissistic people, they do take a lot of time to like stockpile information about you in the beginning, to then know exactly how to push your buttons and pull your strings and place you in these places emotionally, mentally, physically, wherever that they want you. And so that begs the argument too, are they doing that from a place of, because I want to inflict this pain on her later? Or is it that I'm going to stockpile all this stuff so that I can spew it or use it when I feel threatened, when I don't feel safe in the relationship? And not that that makes it right, but that's a question that I get from my clients a lot is, do they mean to do this? Like, do they know what they're doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? Why can't they see how much pain it causes me that they're doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really important part to talk about. I'm happy this kind of like arose naturally, I think I have kind of a couple thoughts. I'm curious what you think about that. Because I think the first one is like what I said, this idea of evil, right? Like I think if the narcissist really is doing everything intentionally and they're scheming and they have this like repository and they're blackmailing and gaslighting, and that's coming from a place of abuse, it's like, you got to get out of there, right? I mean, that's like, that person is like an evil person, right? There probably isn't much that you can do to like help or fix or like do anything there, right? I don't think any therapy is going to work on that individual. That person is like someone that is just trying to create harm and violence in the world, you know? And then the other side is like, okay, maybe it is workable, right? Maybe they can go to a therapist. I mean, I work with a number of people that have narcissistic tendencies, and it's more what you're talking about, where they feel like afraid, it feels like a defense mechanism. You know, a lot of them feel kind of like cowardly and they don't want to take responsibility, so they kind of throw it on other people, which looks like gaslighting, but really it's their own like inner fear of like having a stance or being responsible for anything, you know. Often it goes back to trauma. But we talked about a little bit before the show is like that workability, I think, keeps a lot of people stuck, right? Because I think the partner is like, oh, well, if it's not on purpose, then this person is just like hurt and they need help, and like I love them and we can stay together, and like my love is the one that's going to change their patterns. And I think it's like really sticky for people.
Oh my God. And I have thought those exact thoughts. I can fix him. In my situation, I was dating a man who was this way. But I think when you have that level of empathy and you also do self-work, you understand how long and sometimes painful that process can be for someone to do the work. And so you can try everything to get that person into therapy or to stand by them while they're unpacking some of their stuff. And the foundation there, or the key component, is the other person having the intrinsic motivation and the ability to self-reflect to be able to do that, which is true of people with narcissistic tendencies, right? If we're talking about the lower end of the spectrum, but the higher end of the spectrum, they don't have any desire to look at what they're doing wrong. They don't see it as them doing anything wrong. It's everybody else. It's everybody else's problem.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. If you want to hear Bre's story, check out her first episode, which I think was like 2 or 3 years ago at this point. I think it's called Is Your Relationship Toxic? So if you just search Is Your Relationship Toxic under our podcast, you can see and you can hear all about her story on there. But yeah, back to your point of like, yeah, is it workable or is it not? And I see a lot of this in my work with guys, is that often they come to therapy because of their partners, right? Because of their wives or, you know, their kids. Someone says, hey, you need to change or else I'm going to divorce you. It's like probably like 6 or 7 times out of 10, the reason guys come to therapy, right? And then they do the therapy, and the ones that stick with it, they grow and they change. And, you know, 2 or 3 years later happens, they get healthier. I mean, because it works. And then what I see is that they end up divorcing their partner because the partner doesn't do the work, or they figure out that like, oh yeah, I wasn't the only problem. Like, yes, I have responsibility, of course, but it's like a co-created dynamic. And I've just done 3 years of therapy and my wife has done 0 years of therapy, and she's unwilling to now do her part. I wonder if you see that with the people that you work with too.
Totally. In the reverse, right? It's usually the woman's coming to me because she is doing the self-work and the husband or the partner is refusing. So she's trying to overcompensate and do the amount of work that they need for both of them in order to shift both people's dynamics. And inevitably, most of the time, in most of the situations, the light turns on where they're like, oh, he's not interested in doing the work. So to have a healthy relationship, both people have to be invested. We both have to be invested in doing our own work to understand the shit we're bringing in to the relationship, but then continuing to do the work of like nurturing this ecosystem that we have, that we're creating with the other person. And if one person starts to do more, then that throws off the balance of the ecosystem. And it really shines a light on the difference in like the emotional maturity. If you've gone through 3 years of intentional therapy and you're showing up and you're doing the work and you're integrating and you're processing this stuff, you're going to be a different person in 3 years. And if your partner's not doing anything, they're going to be the same person that they were And if they're also saying, no, this is all your fault, it's going to become very clear to you that that's not true, because humans bring things into relationships. That's just a part of life, whether you're in therapy or not. Like, we're all bringing in our the baggage that we're carrying with us.
Yeah. And I think doing this work is like, we are experts in the gray zone, right? So it's like, I think part of, working with therapist or a coach or whatever is like, you learn to be like, oh, it's not good and evil. It's not victim and abuser. Like, everything is, it depends, and it's situational and it's contextual, and like, we're co-creating it and we're triggering off each other. Like, it's way more nuanced. And I think it's a blessing and a curse to like you said, raise your EQ to a level where you can see that, and that is a fundamental shift. It's like a quantum shift in like perspective, is being able to embrace the gray nuance. And I really do think, I think I'm maybe cynical in some ways of doing it for too long. It's like, I don't think a nuanced person and a black and white person can have a successful relationship. Like, I've just seen that fall apart so many times,
Yeah. Yeah. I look at it in terms of values too, where if one person has a value for self-growth and introspection and communication, and the other person has no interest in those things, it's going to be really hard for you to share anything, because there's not an open line of curiosity there. Versus two people who both value self-work. That doesn't mean you have to like love it, but you see the value in doing the work for the betterment of yourself and all of those people that interact with you. That's going to be a much more aligned relationship, because then you're going to understand the need for communication. You're going to want to increase your ability to communicate, right? Get the strategies, work through the triggers that come up when you have to communicate, all of the things, all the barriers that get in the way, in order to then actually do the thing. But if we can't communicate in relationships, and one person's taking too much accountability and the other person's taking none, like, again, that's throwing off the balance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. And I think, Bill, that empathy, back to what you talked about, I think is critical. I know you run a lot of groups for women, and I find the groups I run for men too to be critical in building empathy, of being like, yeah, we might not disagree and our values might differ, but we know that we're acting in our best intention. And I feel like that is necessary for a relationship. Again, for the relationship that I want, and the one I have with Caroline, I know the relationship that you have, of like being like, hey, we're trying our best here. We're trying to make this work, because I see so many relationships, and again, I'm so curious your experience of this, of like that good versus evil thing, right? Where it's like they become enemies, and they seem like they're more enemies than they're friends. And, we're biased being in helping professions. We hear like only kind of the, dirty laundry, but I get like stunned by how adversarial relationships can really become before people start doing any of this work.
Which is convenient, right? It's like, if my partner is the villain in this story, then I don't have to take accountability. Then I don't have to look at my side of the shit. I'll share a story to this point, because when I got out of my toxic relationship, I believe my ex to have the malignant narcissist tendencies. And what he was doing was inexcusable and painful and hurtful in so many ways. And it was really easy to be like, to myself and to everyone, like, he's terrorizing you. Like, he is the villain in this situation, absolutely, hands down. And I remember the moment where it like clicked in my brain, and I think it was from a therapy session that I was thinking about later on. I was like, oh shit, like I have places to take accountability in this relationship. Like, I didn't set the boundaries. I let him like sort of walk all over my needs and my wants. I didn't second guess what he was saying. I wasn't actually honest with my friends and my family about what was going on, whereas they might have been able to help me see more clearly, right? There were places that I could take accountability for, even in the midst of psychological abuse. And I don't ever want that to sound like we cause the abuse, the person who's receiving that type of behavior. But the ability for you to self-reflect in order to say, like, I have accountability here, or I am taking part in this really dysfunctional dance that we're doing, is huge. That in that moment, for me was such an impactful shift where I was like, okay, this is what I can take now to heal from this relationship. And I can work on this stuff. It no longer is mattering what he's doing or what he wants to do or his self-work or not work that he's doing. What matters is what I'm going to continue to do and where I'm going to focus my effort and my energy now.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, right? Like taking accountability gives you control. It gives you something to work on. It gives you a handle.
Yeah.
Because if you're just a victim and you're helpless, like then it's just going to happen again. Whereas, like you said, whether it's from like the initial attraction, like being attracted to somebody that has these qualities, or from like, not setting boundaries or not vocalizing your needs, like if there's stuff that we are responsible for, then we can grow and we can change because we actually have something to focus on.
Yeah, we have to have the awareness, right? I call myself a relationship clarity coach because to me, clarity is the piece that we need in order to shift anything. We can't change something that we can't see or that we don't understand. So having clarity about yourself and your patterns not only gives you the space and the stuff to work on with your therapist or your coach of like, this is what I'm bringing, and I need to move some of this stuff around so that I'm not carrying so many suitcases into the next relationship. Or when you're in a relationship, you're able to say, oh, I did that thing, I'm so sorry, and make amends to whatever happened. This just happened in my relationship with John, where I was like triggered about something and got really passive aggressive and kind of, I knew I was pulling away. He was trying to make an effort to connect and I was getting very like cold and distant. And I went upstairs and I took a couple moments to regulate because I recognized something was off in my body, had a cry, came back down and was like, I'm so sorry. I was doing my normal thing. This is what happens when I get triggered in this specific way. But having the awareness allowed us to then have the conversation about it and repair what had been, damaged in that moment. But if we don't know what's happening, then we just perpetuating the same behavior and the same patterns, which keeps us in this cycle with our partner, which builds resentment, which to your earlier point, like eventually creates this hatred towards the other person of like, we have been having the same fight for 20 years and nothing's changing.
Yeah. And I think the clarity piece, like you said, is critical to be able to name the pattern. I always encourage my clients to come up with like kind of like a funny or goofy name that can like help disarm it. For me, my relationship, I call it like the spreadsheet, because when I get resentful, I pull out like my spreadsheet of like pros and cons. I just like run through like, is it working? Is it not? Like this whole like hyper analytic process, which is, just defending me from my emotions ultimately. Right. But if I can go to Caroline and say like, hey, the spreadsheet's coming out again, right? Or, hey, the resentment bucket is filling up again. It just makes it external, it's something that like now both of us can work on instead of it being like her fault, right? Because if you make something somebody's fault, they're going to get defensive. I mean, that's like a natural reaction.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. We use the parts work language of like a part of me is feeling this, part of me is feeling that. And that to me is really helpful in externalizing the thing, because it's not me that has reverted back into this behavior that I've been working 20 years to come out of. It's like I got triggered, that part came in to be heard, and now I hear that part and now I've self-regulated. And it puts you in a different sense of control over your own experience or agency over your own experience.
Totally right. And if you get it like early and often, that part won't just like hijack you, right, and take control. You can be like, okay, yeah, this thought is like not rational, but it still needs to be vocalized and it still needs to be worked on. You talked about something in your relationship that I want to go back to kind of pivot into our topic of, men that are in that kind of like victim role, if you want to put it that way, which is like that nice guy pattern. You talked about for you, it's like just being very nice, being very accommodating, always making space, like not having your own boundaries, like probably saying yes to things that you really meant to say no to. And I find that a lot of men, especially in our generation, are nice guys, right? Because they had that abusive father, or they were hurt by other guys growing up. They were bullied or whatever, right? Or they don't want to be toxic masculine, right? They're, might be like very left leaning or something, but then they overcorrect and they become these like nice guys that just keep taking the hits again and again and again. And they get this like martyr complex that eventually blows up, sometimes violently, sometimes, with an addiction or something, right? I see you nodding, so I'm curious, like, is that what you see, that kind of people pleasing being the other side of it?
Yeah, it's so much self-abandonment. And I think when we find ourselves in relationships with somebody who is narcissistic to some degree, we are used to putting our needs last. And we're used to being in a dynamic with somebody who's going to take advantage of taking up space, taking control. So for the men to be the martyr, for the woman to be the rescuer in the relationship, it's all part of the codependency cycle that we get stuck in. But both of those experiences are, I'm going to put this other person's needs above my own because that's where I feel safe, because that's what I'm used to, because that's validating an internal belief that I have that I'm not actually lovable or actually worthy or actually okay if this person leaves me. It's almost like we'll do anything to make them okay so that we're okay, so that they stay. And that's not a great place to build a foundation in a relationship from.
Not a very strong
because
no.
Yeah, it's perpetual fear, really. It's like, I need to dance around this way. I need to do this. I need to not say this in order to maintain the peace. While inside, you're totally neglecting your needs, your desires, like your ability to speak that freely.
Yeah. So as talk about gender differences, I think what you just said, I think underneath, a lot of men ultimately feel that way, right? I think they feel unlovable. I think they feel undesired. I think they have like low self-esteem. And I think they also like have their status wrapped up in their partner, right? Whether their partner is like happy or healthy or attractive or successful or whatever, right? They don't have their own kind of sense of self. But what I see in dudes, and I'm curious, I know you work with them individually, like there's this veneer of strength on top of that, of like, oh, she needs me, she needs my help. Oh yeah, she's like very emotional, but like I'm gonna do whatever it takes to make sure that she feels comfortable and safe. You know, it's like taking that person has a lot of power over them and putting them in this almost like helpless baby, you know, daughter kind of weird position. You know, like I have a client, many clients actually, who, you know, their spouse like tracks their phone. And I ask like, hey, do you track their phone? And they're like, no, like I don't need that. Like I don't really care where she's going. And I'm like, well, then why do you let it go the other way? And it's like, well, you know, she just needs that. She gets really worried about me. She gets really anxious. You know, she's really afraid. I just want to do whatever I can to reassure her that I'm not cheating and that I'm not doing anything bad, because I'm not doing anything bad anyway. So why does it matter that there's a tracker on my phone? They don't question, and they don't see it as a method of control. They see it as they are helping that person feel safe. And I think that's such a mind fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if the woman is playing into this victim role, right? Of like, oh, I've been maybe hurt in the past, or, oh, I just don't trust you, or you've done X, Y, Z, and this is why I need this from you. And I can imagine that being masked a little bit as like, I need this in order to be okay, instead of, I'm going to track your phone because I don't trust you, right? It's like less overt than potentially a man doing that to a woman in what I see with my clients, which adds to the mindfuck of it, because you're like, to your point, your client is like, well, I want to do what I can to help her feel better, but that's taking her responsibility of feeling better from her.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I see that like maybe the more feminine version of narcissism is a lot more covert, like you're saying, and a lot more kind of guilt trippy. I actually dated somebody before meeting my now wife. Luckily, I'd done enough therapy, so I only dated her for like a couple months before I saw this. But it was exactly what you said. It was like, I've been hurt before. I've been in abusive relationships before. And she's very open about that. And she was like, I don't want you to be this person. Don't be like this. Don't be like that. Don't be like this. Right. And there was like all these rules and control coming from that place of hurt. Right. But ultimately it was controlling, and it was trying to like make me into somebody that I wasn't. You know, and being a recovering nice guy, initially I wanted to be like, oh, I'm different. I'm not like that abusive guy. I'm not an asshole. I'm a nice guy. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to leave you. And I found myself like, luckily again, didn't have therapy, so I didn't say this, but like almost saying like, I'm never going to leave you. You can trust me. I'm always going to be here. Like I was getting pulled to say things that, you know, after 3 weeks of dating, I was not feeling at all. But I just wanted to like soothe her. I wanted her to not feel so afraid all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can speak directly to this because I was the woman that came out of a relationship like that. And in my opinion, the healthier way to handle that on the woman's side of things is to say, this triggers me, and I'm aware that this is a trigger for me, and can we have a conversation around this thing? Instead of, you need to change everything about you and in order for me to be okay. Like, there's still triggers that happen for me even in my now relationship, but with my now partner, I can say, hey, I'm getting triggered again based on my past experience. I know you're not him. I know this isn't the same situation. And like, he can hold space for that, and I can process through whatever I'm feeling, and that be enough. That be okay. Like, he doesn't have to change the behavior. And so like, boundaries versus control is also another conversation of what actually is a boundary versus what is somebody controlling you. It can get really hairy, really cloudy.
And get really cloudy. I'm thinking to, again, number of relationships. It's actually, I work with a handful of dudes that are older, right? That are in, 45, 55, and they've been in a relationship since they were like, 18, right? Kind of that like, older Gen X, younger boomer generation where that was very common. And they often come to me and they're at this age of 55 years old or whatever, they're completely isolated. Like, they don't have any friends, and they definitely don't have any female friends. And that's always just been like a boundary in their relationship, is like, you can't talk to other women, because again, I think that was more normal for that generation. But then you have someone that like doesn't know how to talk to women at all, that is actually at a higher risk for an affair because they don't know how to control, sexual impulses and flirting and all that kind of stuff. And they're just cut off from so much of life. But it is, like you said, it's framed as a boundary. It's framed as like, this is what I need for me to feel safe in a relationship with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is unfair. It's like,
yeah, it's fucked up.
It should be a conversation around why you don't trust this person to be in a dynamic with a person of the opposite sex, not you need to change this because of my past experience. But I think it comes back down to, is your partner able to take accountability for their shit? Because if they can't, then they're going to be controlling, then they're going to make you the problem, make your behavior the problem, versus somebody who can say, this is what's coming up for me. This is why it's coming up for me. Can we have a conversation about what this looks like?
Yeah. And what I like about what you're saying is that it's relational, right? It's like, it's a relational issue and you're working on it in the relationship. Whereas, and I try to find my dudes, is like, when it's like, hey, you can't have any female friends, but that person has zero history of, flirting, zero history of affairs, zero history of anything, right? Like, it's just like a blanket rule. That's non-relational, right? It's just like, it's about that other person, regardless. Like you could be anybody, right? You could have any past, any history, any whatever, and the rule would be the same. I think that's like a very like crude way of doing a relationship versus I think really what you're advocating, which is like, get to know the person in front of you and get to know like, what about them triggers you? What about them are you worried about? What about them do you feel safe? Like it's way more complicated than just like a blanket rule.
Yeah. And what situations are you being triggered by that have nothing to do with this current person? Maybe you got cheated on in the past, and that's valid. That is a wound of betrayal that is hard to heal without intentional effort. But your work is to heal that wound so that you're not coming into every relationship thereafter with the assumption that you're going to be deceived and hurt and have to put all these controlling, have to put your partner in a like fucking bubble so that they don't have a life outside of the relationship, because that's not going to thrive. So having the awareness to be able to do that work for yourself and your partner points to a person who is in a healthier mindset to be able to be in a relational dynamic, because it takes two people.
Yeah, it takes two people, and it's like you said, it's hard. It's hard. It takes a ton of work to make it happen. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you wanted to open up, but you were afraid that it wouldn't be taken well? You ask yourself, what's the point? Nothing's going to change anyway. So you do what you always do. You push it down, numb out the pain with a drink, a night out, or pornography. I've been there myself, and I know that men lack the outlets for emotional expression, which is why I founded Men's Therapy Online, a healing hub for men's mental health. If you've been knocked on your ass or just crave meaningful connection, join Men's Therapy Online, a community of men who just get it. We offer individual therapy, men's groups, and powerful retreats, all led by licensed therapists. At Men's Therapy Online, we will help you to get back on your feet and take your life to the next level. Start your journey today at menstherapy.online. What do you see when the typical roles are reversed? You know, when the woman is the more toxic partner and the man is the one that needs help. What differences do you see?
Similar. Yeah, similar to what you're saying of like, I don't want to hurt her more. It tends to be a lot of the woman putting their self in that I need this from you because other men have fucked me over in the past, which is not fair. But it is, I think, coming more from that place of guilt versus when I work with women clients who have male partners, it's coming from more of a place of like the woman feeling like they need to do X, Y, or Z in order to keep being chosen by the man. I think when the roles are reversed, the man who's being manipulated is trying to save or not further hurt the woman versus continue to be chosen by her.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true, right? Like, yeah, the low self-esteem on the woman's end is more out in the open, you know, and I think it's like, yeah, and the abuse and control is more domineering. It's more directive, right? It's more like command and control versus guilt and subtle manipulation.
Which maybe this just occurred to me, and I'm interested in your thoughts of like gender roles play out here quite a bit in how we try to maintain a relationship. Like the man is stepping forward to like protect and like keep her safe and not have any more harm happen. And the woman is sort of like cowering of like, what do you need? And how can I support you and lift you up? Right? It's like, I don't know. It's probably a much bigger societal norms that we're put in and just the way that we're conditioned in relationships too. But I don't see as much of the woman with the man who's being more controlling saying like, I want to protect you. I want to keep you safe. I want you to not get hurt anymore. That's much more when I have male clients with the female partner that I see that.
Yeah, I think gender roles is a huge part of it. And I think it's also men protecting their ego because many of our egos are quite fragile. So as long as we are that protector and as long as we can maintain the narrative that we're the hero, then it's all good. You know, and I think because of gender roles, I think because of privilege and oppression, right? Like a man being abused by a woman, for a guy to admit that is like unbelievably humiliating. I mean, that's why domestic violence doesn't get reported in that direction, right? It's like if you have a female partner and you're getting hit, most men aren't going to say anything. And again, it's the same thing. They're like, oh, well, she was upset. She was angry. She just lost it. But she didn't really hurt me because she's just a girl, right? I mean, there's this kind of misogyny woven in there, you know, with the privilege and oppression dynamic. But I do think for men, yeah, admitting that they are powerless to a woman is like, they would much rather have this kind of other narrative than say that, you know, than even come close to that.
Yeah. How do you see men respond like when they have the awareness around that they were emotionally abused or psychologically or financially or sexually? Like are any types of the abuse easier for men to like claim or to name that that's what happened to them?
I think emotional abuse, actually. I think it goes back into gender roles, right? It's like, you know, men are the physical abusers and sexual, right? And then women are typically the emotional abusers. And I think as a man, it's easier for us to admit that like what women are saying is not okay. And I do think women tend to use their voice more so than their body when it comes to abuse, right? So they'll just like say really nasty things, really castrating things, you know, threaten divorce, threaten taking the kids, whatever, right? So I think for a guy, it can easier say like, oh, what she said was not okay. Like you should not threaten divorce. You should not yell at my kid. You should not like tear me down in a public place. You know, like that is not okay. I think physical, yeah, I think that they shrug it off unless it's something that's like really egregious, but they just shrug it off because I think because of genetic differences, it doesn't hurt us as much because we tend to be like larger, stronger creatures just biologically, so it's like there tends to be dismissal. And then sexual is probably by far the lowest, right? Is like for a man to admit that he was sexually abused by a woman. I think in my 10 years of doing this, over 10 years now, like maybe one or two clients will even say that. I think that realm, it's so much like the man is the abuser, the man is the molester and the predator and all of that. It's very rarely, if ever, even talked about the other way,
Yeah. And before we started recording, we talked a little bit about like using the term like attracting the crazy woman, right? Mm-hmm. Like I could see it almost them playing it off as she wasn't abusive, she was just crazy.
Yes.
And I keep attracting crazy women instead of I keep attracting abusive women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's something like erotic about that, right? Because it is like, I know, you've also kind of studied like Tantra and ancient wisdom and stuff. And there's like this like wild shadow feminine that for most men, I think we are attracted to, like it does burn us really hard, but like that, like hypersexual, hyper emotional, like often very beautiful or very graceful or very like stand out in their style, right? Like just very loud in the world, like archetype, like as men, we are attracted to. And we often will overlook or minimize the like shadow side of that, the more chaotic and abusive side of that.
Yeah. It sounds like women being attracted to the bad boy.
Same thing. Right? Exactly.
Yeah. It's like this unpredictable, like elusive person who's going to give me a lot of excitement and is very intense and very dramatic and very sensual and very like can take me to places I've never been, and it's like often really bad places, but women get focused on the bad boy. And it just like men have a frustration with women always leaning towards the bad boy, right? Women also are frustrated with men that lean towards the crazy women because they're like, hello, I've been over here doing therapy for 5 years and like, where are all the good guys? Where are all the guys who want women who are doing their own work? And we hear it both ways, right? The men are like, where are the women who are doing their own work? And the women are like, where are the men who are doing their own work? They just like are finding each other, but they're out there.
I know. I mean, I know you have talked about this offline of like doing gender reconciliation work. And I'm still in the back, especially with you specifically, of like creating that. Because I think there needs to be like, I don't know if a dating service, but like, or joint retreats or something, joint groups where people that have done work of separate genders can meet other people and actually like do that next step of reintegrating and healing. Because I think that's very true. It's like a lot of the dudes I work with, they get through this and then they're like lonely and pissed because they feel like what they're offering is not accepted by society because it's like stable. And I think in our world of like high stimulation, stable is boring. It's just not that exciting. It's not that romantic. It's not that erotic. It's just kind of like solid,
Well, we've been fed in every like that love bombing is love. So you have somebody who's not like going above and beyond and pouring all of this like overwhelming desire onto you in the first 3 days of knowing each other, like that we come to expect that as women and men, I think, just from the media. And so if we're not that type of person, of course, part of our brain is going to be like, well, there's nobody who's going to want that because everybody wants the bad boy or wants the crazy girl. And that's just everybody deep down. Well, not everyone. Most people deep down want the stability, but they just have to like unpack some of the shit that makes the chaos feel familiar to them in order to be able to receive and to be in that stable place.
Yeah, totally. Right. And I think to highlight another part of what you're saying is like being okay with ambivalence, especially early dating, which I think because of dating apps and social media, it's like, there's no room for that. Like you said, it should just be this like romantic, swept away, oh my God, we're taking a trip to Europe or Mexico. And it's just like, I can't keep my hands off you, right? And it's like, fuck man, like if that's what's happening after date 3, it's not about you, right? That person doesn't know you. They literally cannot know you to the extent to feel an emotion that strongly after having 3 coffee dates with you. Like it's just not there. But I do think there's not a lot of tolerance for ambivalence and like getting to know somebody.
Yeah. it's really interesting that we have the expectation for an unhealthy dynamic, and we're going into dating with this expectation of this euphoria and this whole made up love story that's going to happen, when you actually don't want that to happen. If you've had that, if you've been in that experience, you are going into dating like, who is the most stable person that I can be with? Like, I want to go on a walk. I want to go on a coffee. I don't want to do anything like exciting. That's maybe not the right way to say it, but you don't want that same like rush. You don't want to be on the roller coaster with the person. You just want to slowly get to know them and build that trust over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you this question, because I'll give you my answer. I'm curious what you think is like, do you think love at first sight is real? Actually, I just wrote a blog for the website about toxic relationships. And what my definition of it is like, a toxic relationship is when your trauma perfectly fits with your partner's trauma, right? And it creates these like massive trauma bond that is just like you said, super intense right out the gate. It feels super romantic, super erotic. It's like, the word limerence, right? That's kind of tossed around in our industry, like that kind of honeymoon obsession thing. So for my answer, it's like love at first sight, just run away, because that's the trauma bond. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between like, it's like feeling a magnetic pull to the person in a very familiar, dysfunctional, like scary, exciting way. That's the way I kind of like see a toxic relationship like starting, versus having attraction for somebody and like maybe feeling desire for that person, but it's not an all-consuming like I'm dropping everything to go this direction with this person. So, but in the toxic relationship dynamic, that's not love, right? So it's like, that's lust at first sight. There's a lot of chemistry. There's a lot of chemicals happening, but you can also feel passion and excitement in a healthy dynamic. It's just not, it's not consuming, and there's depth that come along that is in with the excitement. So it's not all just what are these amazing things that we can do or how much money I can spend on you. It's having really real conversations from both sides, both people sharing. It's meeting each other's friends. It's like doing the things that help to build that foundation together, while also feeling the sexual chemistry or feeling the passion, right? We don't have to be with people that we aren't attracted to. That's not the point. It's just balancing all of those experiences, so you're not just being, floating around in the clouds with this person. You're tethered to the ground.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the chemical or like the love drug part of it? I know before you were in this, you worked in the addictions field, so I know there's a ton of overlap. But yeah, if you could just kind of riff on that a little bit, because I think that's a huge part of this, is people getting addicted to that like rush that comes with that love at first sight relationship.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the dopamine, the oxytocin that gets dumped in our brain in the beginning of any type of relationship, right? We can be in a love bomb experience, which is the exacerbated version of the beginning of a relationship. But even when you're dating somebody new and it's healthy, like you're very excited about each other, you're on drugs, right? Your brain is just producing dopamine and oxytocin because you're having these new experiences and you're anticipating these new experiences with your partner. So dopamine is released even in the anticipation of getting something, which is part of why, like for drugs and alcohol, the seeking of the drug and alcohol is also part of getting the high from that. So in these really up and down relationships, if we are seeking the next high, if we're waiting for it, if we're like, what are we going to do next? That's releasing dopamine. And we get used to that cadence. And usually if we're in these types of relationships in the beginning, we're used to that cadence on some level already, right? We're used to the chaos. We're used to things feeling unpredictable. We're used to people not responding or like flooding our inboxes, right? It's like we're used to the drama. And so the dopamine plays a part in keeping us hooked into that game with them. And then the oxytocin that's released when we actually get the thing, right? When we're actually like with them, or we're having the sex, or when we're getting the attention, the love, the desire, is also really powerful in our brain, just period, the chemical in our brain, period. And then all the associations that we make with that. He's showing up because he loves me, and we're going to have the dream life that I've always wanted. And, you know, it's very intoxicating and takes you to a different place of like, this is what life is going to look like when there's been no foundation laid for life looking like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, it's like, how do we get this message out? I mean, the podcast, right? And your podcast, definitely your listeners, check out Bre's podcast. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. But like, how do we get this out? Because just like you said, I'm flashback to a client who's like, you know, his girlfriend was just blowing up his phone constantly, right? Like literally, we're talking hundreds of text messages a day, no exaggeration. You know, 3 or 4 calls a day, no exaggeration. And he saw that. It took him a year of therapy to not see that as him being desired. You know, he was like, oh, it's because she wants me. You know, there was a heavy sexual component because she was sending him tons of nudes and sexting and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, dude, that's crazy. You know, I mean, that's like abusive. It was ultimately controlling. But for this person and this archetype of people, it becomes this like really ego boosting thing of like, oh, look at how much my partner wants me. Look at how attractive I am. Look at how cool I am. Look at, you know, I have this person who just like would do anything for me. And like you were saying, it is unbelievably intoxicating. And not normal, but I think that is normal actually. It's a crazy relationship. But like, you know, a healthy relationship is like, it's fine. Like it's secure. You can talk when you need to talk. You don't need to constantly check in with somebody. You know, it's all good. You know, it kind of ebbs and flows. Like, but it's a lot more, boring.
Well, it's a lot less consuming. It can still be exciting. And I guess I feel part of our mission is to like not perpetuate the message that healthy relationships are boring, because then people don't want them. So it's like, it's not boring, it's stable, but stable can feel less like amplifying in your nervous system, which feels different, right? So it's like, for the men who are receiving this love bombing from the women, what is that validating about you? Like, what are you gaining from that experience? Because I think it's so important to understand, like, to have a sense of self before we go into dating as men or women. Because if we don't, then we're sort of looking for people to fill those voids. So potentially, if the man is not feeling like he is a worthy lover or a worthy person, he's looking for a woman to validate that. And the validation's coming from the 100 text messages a day. And that's really feeding his ego that he's desirable and he's worthy. But if you can go into dating already having that baseline understanding that you're desirable and worthy, then that changes how we see that behavior. Like, if we're not getting validation from it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is weird. This feels strange. I really believe I haven't been love bombed since healing from being love bombed, but I would imagine if I got that amount of attention right now, in the intensity of that, I would be like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? Like, back up. I need some space, you know? So we're more primed to receive unhealthy behavior when we're getting something from that person's unhealthy behavior.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, what I tell my clients is like, a relationship should be the icing on the cake, right? But like, you are the cake. You know, you got to like bake the cake first and like develop something that you love and you're proud of. And like, yeah, you can have a, cake without icing. It's still fine. The icing's going to make it better, but you got to have that, because if it's just emptiness and insecurity, it's going to bleed into that. And yeah, I think like you said, once you get healthier, you can see what it is. You know, if you have someone that is begging you to come home all the time because, you know, they want to have sex with you, that probably feels pretty good. But if you look at it, it's like, oh, they just want me to be home all the time and not out in my life. You know, like, they don't want me to be like hanging out with other people or, you know, socializing or having hobbies or other connections. Like, yeah, it's flattering, but also it's like a method of control so that we're just together all the time and that you're being monitored all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's a deep well of insecurity of your partners that you're never going to be able to fill. And so that feels really intense and overwhelming as the other partner, because you're like, no matter what I do, you're still insecure, you're still unhappy, you still don't believe you're beautiful, you still don't believe you're lovable, no matter how much I tell you, right? I know that that's an experience that men have with female partners too, where they're like, I tell her she's beautiful all the time, I want to have sex with her, but yet she's critiquing her body and telling me how fat she is and how disgusting she is. And it's like, you're never going to be able to fill that for her. And so if she wants you home all of the time because she's insecure and she's not doing anything about that insecurity, then that's going to be the dynamic that plays out perpetually forever and ever. And do you want to be responsible for that, or seemingly responsible for making her okay?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you about that because I see that a lot. And it's kind of that sunk cost fallacy of like, yeah, I've been trying to fill this hole for a decade and it's not full. And I think, me, and I'm sure you as outside perspective, we're just like, yeah, walk away, right? Like it's so obvious, right? It's like, yeah, dude, you've been doing it for a decade. Like, why do you think it's going to be different? But there is that really powerful sunk cost thing of like, I've been doing this, I need to keep doing it. Maybe this next one is going to be the one that does the thing, So yeah, how do you help people see that they are just kind of banging their head against a brick wall?
I call it potential land with my clients, where it's like part of us is living in this reality where the thing has already been fixed, right? And we can see that as a potential for us in our future, and that place feels really good to be. And it's just like, well, maybe I can say it different, or maybe I can show up differently, or maybe I could try this, or maybe this conversation needs to just go this way, or maybe we need to go to couples therapy. It's like trying to figure out all of the ways that we can get the end result, but it's not taking into accountability or taking into account like how long you've been living in this reality place. And so with my clients, I help them start to address what is actually happening in conversations, in the relationship. How many times have they tried to say the same thing in different ways, but the other person hasn't heard them or continues to tell them that they're wrong or what have you? And we really just gather a lot of data around what is actually happening. Because if we're living in potential land, we're not really in reality. But in order to change reality, we have to come back into reality. So, and it takes the person coming to that understanding themselves in order to want to leave that dynamic, right? We could tell them all day long that this is not how it's supposed to be. You deserve more than this. You've tried 14,000 times. But if they don't believe, if they haven't seen that like rock bottom moment yet, then that they're still on to the hope. They're still clinging to the hope. And grieving the hope is one of the hardest parts, I think, in these toxic, dysfunctional relationships, because we have put so much stake in what's going to happen when we get that end result, the life that we're going to have when we finally can do whatever we want to do with the partner, that it's hard to let that go. It's like grieving a whole nother relationship that you weren't even living in real life.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only thing I'll add with that, I think, to men, is when men I work with, it's also a big slice of humble pie of being like, I couldn't fix this. Because I think as men, we're conditioned to think that we can fix everything. And if we can't fix it, it's because we are weak, or we're failing, or we're not smart enough, or whatever. Like, we couldn't solve the problem. So it feels like a personal failure in of ourselves too, of like, I couldn't fix this person. I couldn't fix our marriage. I couldn't, do it for my kids or whatever it was. And that's devastating to a lot of people.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much, like, I just want to like hug every man that's had that feeling, because you were never meant to fix it all. It's never been yours to fix. This comes back to the two sides of the relationship. Like, you're in charge of your side, she's in charge of her side. And as much as you want to have the control or have the ability to fix her, that has to come from her. And some people will choose to not fix themselves, who will choose to not do any type of work that can better who they are in relationship. And that's a really tough pill to swallow too, where it's like, I tried everything I could and nothing worked.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, for men, I just think humility is a great virtue, and it helps to counter some of our internalized misogyny, which we all have, of like seeing your female partner as an equal contributor in their relationship, because that fix-it mentality, like we're conditioned, but that is misogynistic inherently, of being like, I'm the sole responsible person for my relationship because this person is like less than me, right? It's a less than equal partner. So like the first step is being like, oh yeah, there's two people in this dynamic. It's not me trying to control my partner.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I've had several women, female clients, who have also tried to fix their partner, who have also thought that they can do enough to get the person to save the person, right? Kind of perpetually attracting the man who needs to be saved. So it's just an interesting observation that even crossing gender roles, in that, like, I can rescue, I can save you, I can do it for the both of us, seems to be like a common thread in these types of relationships too.
Yeah. And I wondered, I'm curious what you think about this, if the expression is different. Because when I see men do it, like the fixing, it's on that like material physical plane. It's like, oh, once we have the home, once we have the kid, once I make enough money, once I get this big break in my job, right? Like once I can buy her the things that she's been claiming, once she can get that plastic surgery, whatever it is, right? Like, you know, once we can work out and we're both hot, right? Like then it's going to be fixed. Whereas I imagine with women, it's much more like that emotional fixing of like, once he can heal and realize his trauma, then he'll be fixed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's exactly true. Yeah, it's much more, how can I help him see his potential? How can I get him to try out for the thing, or to audition, or to get the job, or whatever, in order to help his confidence, which will then help the relationship, which will then help me. Yeah, it is more emotional for sure.
Yeah, I think it's different, like expressions. But yeah, we are at our time. This conversation went by really fast, and I'll definitely have to have you on in the future sometime next year. But as we're wrapping up, where can people find you online and learn more about you?
You can go to my website. It's brewolta.com. I'll send you the links for all that. On there, you can find some free resources. You can also find the link to my podcast. It's called Heartbreak to Wholeness. It's on Apple, Spotify, all the main places you'll look for that. And just for men listening, most of the way that I speak in my marketing and on my podcast is directed towards women, because I work majorly with women. But it does apply to you too. And I have worked with men in the past individually. So encourage people to reach out if they're curious, they're looking for more support, and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely reach out to her. I think something that Bre will do really well for you if you're a listener is provide you with a clear mirror. You know, I know you do like the discovery calls. So if you're listening to this and you're like, is my relationship toxic? Like, is this going on? Bre has talked to tons of people, men and women, that have been through this and can give you a pretty objective kind of diagnostic, you know, of like, okay, this needs to change and this needs some work. And I think as men, I think being a modern man and an honorable man, we crave clear mirrors. We crave clear feedback. And I know, you know, personally, professionally, Bre does not shy away from that. So I think it's a really valuable resource to have.
Yeah. It also could be helpful if the person listening is with a woman who has been in some sort of toxic situation in the past and is using that in like a more of a controlling way, and they're just unsure of what that should look like, or what is a healthy way to be with a person who has been through some sort of trauma like that. Happy to be that mirror there too.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's really valuable. So yeah, Bre, thank you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this, do all the social stuff, like, share, subscribe, you know, and send this to somebody who might be in a toxic relationship. You know, I think those people, they can be difficult to reach. I know Bre is an expert in reaching them, and I think her words might start to shake it a little bit, you know, because I think as men, we know women that are in this toxic relationship too, that need just as many mirrors and voices and encouragement as possible to make a better life for themselves and to get out of something that could be really dangerous and abusive. So share the message, send them over to Bre stuff. All that will be in the show notes. She's got tons of, groups and freebies and giveaways. There's tons of different ways to plug in, and all that will be listed in the notes below. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.